It all started with a letter. A plain white envelope arrived in the mail one quiet Tuesday morning. Inside was a note written in neat cursive handwriting, informing her that she had inherited a piece of land from someone she barely remembered. Her grandfather. The woman who received the letter wasn't expecting anything like this. She lived a simple life, working as an office assistant in the city, far away from the countryside where her family roots lay buried under layers of time. For years, she'd heard only bits and pieces about him. A man who preferred solitude, avoided phones, and spent most of his days wandering around the property he called home. People said he was stubborn, even eccentric, but no one really knew much beyond that. He rarely visited the city, and when he did, it felt more like a chore than a reunion. When he passed away, there was no funeral, no gathering, just silence. And now here she was, holding proof that he hadn't completely forgotten about her after all. Curiosity got the better of her. On a weekend trip, she drove out to see what had been left behind. The directions led her down winding roads lined with tall trees that seemed to whisper secrets as leaves rustled in the breeze. Eventually, she reached the edge of the property. But instead of finding open fields or empty acres like she expected, something strange greeted her eyes. There were houses, lots of them. Rows upon rows of identical homes stretched across the landscape, each with tidy lawns and shiny mailboxes. It looked like any other suburban neighborhood you'd find anywhere else, except this wasn't supposed to be here. Not on her grandfather's land. Confused, she parked her car near the entrance sign, which read Willow Creek Estates. Beneath the name, smaller letters promised, "A community like no other." She stepped out of the car and approached the guard booth at the gate. An older man sat inside, flipping through a magazine. He looked up and smiled warmly. "Welcome to Willow Creek," he said cheerfully. "Are you here for a showing?" She shook her head. "No, I'm not. Actually, I think there might be some kind of mistake. This is my land, or at least I just inherited it." The smile faded from the man's face. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he cleared his throat and gestured for her to come closer. "Listen, sweetheart," he began slowly. "This place has been developed for years. There's no way you own this land. Trust me, I've seen the paperwork myself." But she insisted. Back home, she dug into old files, searching for answers. That's when she found documents tucked away in dusty folders, papers signed decades ago, transferring ownership of parts of the land to developers. The signatures looked rushed, almost forced, as if someone had pressured her grandfather into agreeing. Yet despite handing over rights to certain sections, large portions of the property still technically belonged to her family. As she sifted through the papers, she noticed something unusual. Scribbled in the margins of one document were cryptic notes. Phrases like "don't let them dig too deep" and "they'll regret waking it" jumped out at her. At first glance, they sounded paranoid, maybe even delusional. But the more she read, the more intrigued she became. What exactly was her grandfather trying to protect? Her search took her to the attic, where boxes of her grandfather's belongings had been stored untouched for years. Among stacks of yellowed books and faded photographs, she stumbled upon a leather-bound journal. Its cover was cracked with age, and the pages smelled faintly of damp earth. Flipping through it, she discovered entries detailing his daily life on the land. He wrote about watching sunsets over the hills, tending to crops, and listening to the wind move through the trees. But mixed in with these peaceful reflections were darker passages, warnings about intruders and mentions of something ancient sleeping beneath the soil. One entry stood out above the rest. Her grandfather described how generations before him had placed safeguards on the land, ensuring that anyone who dared disturb its natural order would pay a price. He referred to it as a trap, though he never explained what kind of trap it was or how it worked. All he said was that it had been there for over 100 years, waiting silently for the right moment to strike. By the end of the day, her mind was racing. How could such a tranquil-looking neighborhood sit atop land steeped in mystery? What secrets lay hidden beneath those manicured lawns and neatly paved streets? More importantly, why hadn't anyone uncovered them yet? That night, as she lay in Bed staring at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd stumbled onto something bigger than herself, something old and possibly dangerous. Little did she know, the real story was only beginning. The days following her discovery were anything but ordinary. She tried to go about her life as usual, convincing herself that the journal entries and cryptic notes were just the ramblings of an old man who had spent too much time alone. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the unease gnawing at her. Something felt off about Willow Creek Estates, and it wasn't long before others started noticing it too. It began subtly. A flickering streetlight here, a creaky floorboard there. At first, people shrugged it off as typical issues in a housing development. New homes often have minor problems, right? But then things escalated. One morning, a homeowner woke up to find their kitchen sink gushing water uncontrollably, even though the tap was turned off. Another resident reported hearing loud knocking on their walls late at night, only to discover no one was there when they checked outside. The incidents grew stranger by the week. Lights would dim randomly, appliances would turn on by themselves, and doors would slam shut without explanation. Some residents claimed to hear whispers coming from empty rooms or see shadows moving where no one stood. A few even swore they felt cold spots in certain areas of their homes, as if icy fingers brushed against their skin. At first, everyone chalked it up to faulty wiring or plumbing mishaps. The Homeowners Association, HOA, sent repair crews to investigate, but nothing seemed out of place. Every pipe was intact, every wire properly connected. Yet the problems persisted, growing worse with each passing day. Cracks began appearing in foundations, spreading like veins across once pristine walls. Windows shattered without warning, sending shards of glass cascading onto floors. It was as though the houses themselves were fighting back. Rumors spread quickly among the neighbors. Some blamed poor construction quality. Others whispered about supernatural forces. Tensions rose as fear took hold. Families huddled together in living rooms, debating whether they should stay or leave. Arguments erupted over whose fault it was. Was it the HOA for cutting corners during construction, or was something else entirely responsible? Amid the chaos, she found herself drawn deeper into the mystery. People approached her with questions, hoping she might have answers since she was technically part of the land's history. They didn't know what to make of her claims about her grandfather's warnings, but desperation made them willing to listen. One evening, after another round of strange occurrences, a small group of homeowners invited her to join them for coffee. Sitting around a cluttered dining table, they shared their experiences and theories. One woman spoke of waking up to find her bed shaking violently, while a man recounted how his car alarm went off repeatedly despite no visible cause. Everyone agreed. The situation was getting out of hand. As they talked, she pulled out the journal and showed them some of the entries. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages, pointing out phrases like, "Protect what is ours, and they'll pay the price." The group leaned in closer, their expressions shifting from skepticism to concern. Could these words really mean something? Was the land itself trying to communicate? Inspired by their curiosity, she decided to dig further. Back at home, she scoured the attic again, searching for anything else her grandfather might have left behind. Buried beneath stacks of old newspapers, she uncovered a rolled-up map tucked inside a metal tube. Carefully unrolling it, she gasped. The map depicted the entire property, complete with detailed markings indicating tunnels running underneath the surface. Symbols dotted the edges of the paper, resembling runes or ancient hieroglyphs. She immediately reached out to local historians and archaeologists, hoping someone could decipher the symbols. After several phone calls and emails, a retired professor agreed to meet with her. When she showed him the map, his eyes widened. "These symbols," he said slowly, "are tied to folklore about protective curses. Your ancestors may have used them to ward off intruders." Her heart sank. If what he said was true, then the strange happenings weren't random. They were deliberate. The land wasn't just reacting to the presence of new homes, it was actively resisting them. And based on the professor's knowledge, the resistance would likely grow stronger unless something changed. Determined to uncover the truth, she organized a meeting with the same group of homeowners who had gathered earlier. This time armed with the map and the professor's insights, she laid everything on the table. "I think we need to explore those tunnels," she said firmly. "Whatever's causing all this, it's probably down there." The suggestion sparked a mix of excitement and apprehension. While some were eager to investigate, others hesitated, fearing what they might find. But as the disturbances continued and worsened, everyone eventually agreed. Staying silent wasn't an option anymore. Together, they made plans to descend into the earth and confront whatever secrets lay hidden below. That night, as she prepared for the expedition, she couldn't help but feel a pang of doubt. What if they uncovered something beyond their understanding? Something dangerous? Still, she reminded herself why she was doing this, not just for herself, but for the families living above ground, struggling to cope with forces they couldn't explain. Whatever awaited them in the tunnels, she knew one thing for sure: ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. The decision to explore the tunnels wasn't made lightly. For days, the group debated how to approach it. Some argued that they should involve authorities or experts. After all, venturing underground without proper guidance could be dangerous. Others insisted that bringing outsiders into the situation would only complicate things further. By the time they reached a consensus, everyone was on edge. Their nerves stretched thin from sleepless nights and constant worry. Finally, armed with flashlights, sturdy boots, and a sense of cautious determination, they set out to locate the entrance to the tunnels. Using the map as their guide, they identified an old shed at the far corner of the property, a structure long forgotten by most residents but clearly marked on the faded parchment. Pushing open the rickety wooden door, they found themselves staring at what appeared to be a trapdoor embedded in the dirt floor. It was covered in dust and cobwebs, its iron handle rusted shut. With some effort, they managed to pry it open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. The air smelled damp and earthy, carrying with it a faint chill that sent shivers down their spines. One by one they descended, their flashlight beams cutting through the oppressive blackness like hesitant fingers probing the unknown. As they moved deeper, the atmosphere grew heavier, almost suffocating. The walls of the tunnel were rough-hewn stone, slick with moisture, and etched with carvings that seemed to glow faintly under the light. At first glance, the symbols resembled those on the map, but up close, they took on a life of their own, twisting, shapes that looked both ancient and alive, as if they pulsed with energy. No one spoke. The silence was broken only by the sound of their footsteps echoing eerily against the confined space. After what felt like hours, they emerged into a vast chamber unlike anything they'd expected. The room was circular, its ceiling lost in shadow, high above. Along the walls, intricate carvings depicted scenes that told a story. Rituals performed by robed figures, offerings placed before towering altars, and shadowy forms writhing in agony. In the center of the chamber stood a massive stone platform resembling an altar. On it rested an ornate box, its surface engraved with patterns that matched the family crest she had seen in her grandfather's journal. For a moment, no one moved. The weight of the discovery pressed down on them, filling the air with a palpable sense of awe and dread. Then, steeling herself, she stepped forward and approached the box. Her hands trembled as she traced the engraving with her fingertips. It felt warm to the touch, almost as if it recognized her presence. Slowly, carefully, she lifted the lid. Inside was a collection of items that defied explanation. There were more journals, written in languages none of them could decipher, along with bundles of dried herbs tied with twine. A small vial filled with dark liquid sat nestled among the artifacts, its contents shimmering faintly in the dim light. But the centerpiece was a letter, handwritten in familiar cursive script, the same handwriting she'd seen in the journal. Upstairs. She unfolded the letter with trembling hands and began to read aloud. The words painted a picture of a past steeped in mystery and sacrifice. Her ancestors, it turned out, hadn't just lived on the land. They had protected it. Centuries ago, they had bound something to the soil using rituals passed down through generations. This something wasn't merely a force of nature. It was described as malevolent, a being capable of immense destruction if unleashed. According to the letter, the curse acted as a safeguard, designed to deter anyone who sought to claim the land for selfish purposes. If intruders disturbed the sacred grounds, the curse would awaken, manifesting in ways meant to drive them away. Cracks in foundations, strange noises, malfunctioning appliances, all of it was part of the mechanism. But there was a warning too. If the curse was ignored for too long, the consequences would escalate beyond mere inconvenience. The entity itself might break free, wreaking havoc not just on the immediate area, but potentially spreading far beyond. The gravity of the situation hit them like a wave. They weren't dealing with faulty construction or random malfunctions. This was something far older, far darker than any of them had imagined. The group exchanged uneasy glances, each person grappling with their own mix of fear and disbelief. What were they supposed to do now? Could they stop the curse, or were they already too late? One of the homeowners, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, broke the silence. "If we're going to fix this," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air, "we need to understand exactly how this thing works, and maybe figure out a way to undo it." Her heart sank at the thought. Undoing the curse sounded impossible, especially since her grandfather's letter made it clear that tampering with it carried risks of its own. Still, she couldn't deny the logic behind his suggestion. If they did nothing, the entity beneath the land would continue to grow stronger, endangering not just the people living above, but anyone nearby. Determined to find answers, she suggested, they take the artifacts back to the surface for closer examination. Carefully wrapping the items in cloth, they retraced their steps through the tunnels, their minds racing with questions. Who were these ancestors, and why had they gone to such lengths to protect the land? Was the entity truly as dangerous as the writings claimed, or was it merely a myth meant to scare off trespassers? Back in the safety of daylight, they spread the artifacts across a large table in someone's garage. Each item seemed to hold clues, though deciphering them proved challenging. One of the journals contained sketches of the same symbols they'd seen in the tunnels, accompanied by notes about their meanings. Another journal detailed rituals used to maintain the barrier, keeping the entity contained. It became clear that breaking the curse wouldn't be as simple as flipping a switch. It required knowledge, precision, and perhaps even a willingness to confront forces beyond human comprehension. As the day wore on, exhaustion began to set in. The group agreed to reconvene the next day after getting some rest, but none of them slept well that night. Images of the carvings and the ominous warnings lingered in their minds, haunting their dreams. For her, the burden felt particularly heavy. This was her family's legacy, her responsibility. Whether she liked it or not, she was the one who would have to decide what came next. By morning, she knew what she had to do. She couldn't let fear paralyze her, not when so many lives depended on finding a solution. Gathering her courage, she resolved to dig deeper into the journals and consult anyone who might help unravel the mysteries hidden within. Whatever secrets lay buried in the past, she was determined to uncover them, and hopefully, find a way to bring peace to the land once again. The next morning, the group gathered again, their faces etched with exhaustion but also a shared determination. No one had slept well, not after what they'd seen in the tunnels and read in the journals. The weight of the situation hung over them like a storm cloud, dark and unrelenting. They knew they couldn't keep ignoring the problem. Every crack in the walls, every flickering light, every unsettling noise was a reminder that time was running out. She stood at the head of the table where the artifacts were still spread out. The ornate box sat in the center, its presence almost magnetic. She glanced around at the others, seeing the same mix of fear and resolve reflected in their eyes. "We need to go back," she said finally, breaking the tense silence. Her voice was calm, though her hands betrayed her nervousness as they fidgeted with the edge of her jacket. "If we're going to fix this, we have to understand it fully. That means exploring more of the tunnels." No one argued. Despite their fear, everyone understood that staying on the surface wouldn't solve anything. The answers, and possibly the solution, were buried deep underground. With renewed resolve, they prepared for another descent into the labyrinth beneath Willow Creek Estates. This time, they came better equipped. Armed with stronger flashlights, rope, and even walkie-talkies to stay connected, they felt slightly more prepared for whatever awaited them. Still, as they approached the trapdoor leading to the tunnels, an unspoken dread lingered in the air. It wasn't just the darkness or the unknown that scared them. It was the feeling that they were walking into something far older and more powerful than themselves. Once inside, the atmosphere grew heavier with each step. The carvings on the walls seemed to loom larger now, their twisted shapes casting eerie shadows in the flickering light. One of the homeowners, a young woman who had been quiet until now, paused to examine a particularly intricate panel. "Look at this," she whispered, pointing to a series of symbols arranged in a spiral pattern. "It's like a warning, like it's telling us not to go any further." Her observation sent a ripple of unease through the group, but there was no turning back. They pressed onward, following the map until they reached a section of the tunnel they hadn't explored before. Here the air felt colder, almost biting, and the sound of dripping water echoed ominously in the distance. As they rounded a corner, they stumbled upon another chamber, a smaller one this time, but no less ominous. In the center of the room stood a pedestal carved from black stone, its surface smooth except for a single symbol etched into the top. Surrounding the pedestal were shards of broken pottery and fragments of what looked like ancient tools. The sight sent chills down their spines. It was clear that this place had once been used for rituals, ones that probably involved invoking, or containing, the entity described in the journals. As they examined the chamber, one of the men noticed something embedded in the wall, a hidden alcove partially concealed by crumbling mortar. Carefully, he reached in and pulled out a dusty scroll wrapped in leather. His fingers trembled as he unrolled it, revealing faded ink markings that resembled instructions. Though much of the text was illegible, certain phrases leapt out at them. "Seal the bond, speak the words, and most chillingly, do not awaken." Their discovery sparked both hope and dread. On one hand, these writings might hold the key to reversing, or at least controlling, the curse. On the other hand, tampering with such ancient knowledge carried risks they could only guess at. What if reading the wrong phrase aloud triggered something irreversible? What if their mere presence in the tunnels was enough to anger the entity further? Despite their fears, they decided to take the scroll back to the surface for closer study. But as they turned to leave, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. A low rumble echoed through the tunnels, growing louder with each passing second. Dust fell from the ceiling and cracks spiderwebbed across the walls. Panic surged through the group as they realized they weren't alone anymore. From the shadows emerged figures, dark, shapeless forms that moved unnaturally, gliding toward them without making a sound. Their presence filled the air with an oppressive energy, making it hard to breathe. One of the homeowners screamed, dropping her flashlight as she stumbled backward. Another grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the exit. "Run!" someone shouted, his voice cracking with terror. They sprinted through the tunnels, their footsteps pounding against the stone floor as the rumbling grew deafening. Behind them, the shadowy figures gave chase, their movements jerky yet relentless. The group barely made it to the staircase leading upward, scrambling over each other in their desperation to escape. Just as the first person burst into the shed above, the trapdoor slammed shut with a thunderous crash, trapping two stragglers below. She froze, her heart pounding wildly as she stared at the closed trapdoor. Without hesitation, she dropped to her knees and yanked at the handle, straining against its weight. The others joined her, pulling together until the door finally gave way. The two trapped below scrambled out, gasping for air, their faces pale with shock. Once everyone was safe, outside they collapsed onto the grass, trembling with adrenaline and relief. For several minutes no one spoke. All they could do was stare at the shed, half expecting the ground to split open and swallow them whole. When the shaking subsided and the unnatural noises faded, they allowed themselves a moment to process what had just happened. Whatever they had encountered in the tunnels wasn't human, and whatever it was, it didn't want them digging deeper. Back at the house, they pored over the scroll, piecing together fragments of information. It became clear that the curse wasn't just a passive deterrent. It was alive, feeding off the chaos it created. The entity bound to the land wasn't content to simply scare people away. It wanted revenge for being disturbed. Each ritual performed by her ancestors had added layers to the barrier, keeping the entity contained. But those layers were weakening, worn down by years of neglect and the intrusion of modern development. She felt the full weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. If they didn't act soon, the consequences would spiral out of control. Yet, undoing the curse entirely seemed impossible without unleashing the entity completely. There had to be another way. A middle path that honored her family's legacy while protecting the innocent families living above ground. With heavy hearts, the group agreed to try one last thing, performing a counter-ritual at the altar in the main chamber. According to the scroll, this ritual could potentially weaken the entity's influence without breaking the seal entirely. But it came with a warning. The process would test their courage and unity. If even one person faltered, the entire attempt would fail. That night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, she replayed the events of the day in her mind. The shadowy figures, the trembling earth, the desperate race to survive. It all felt surreal, like something out of a nightmare. Yet she knew it was real, more real than anything she'd ever faced before. Tomorrow, they would return to the tunnels one final time. Whether they succeeded or failed, there was no turning back now. The morning of their final descent into the tunnels was heavy with tension. The group gathered in a circle, sitting on chairs pulled from nearby homes, their faces pale and drawn. No one spoke much. The weight of what they were about to attempt hung over them like a storm cloud. She sat quietly at the center, clutching the scroll tightly in her hands. Its faded markings seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light, as if it knew the stakes of their mission. "We don't have a choice," she said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, though her hands betrayed her nerves as they fidgeted with the edge of the scroll. "If we don't do this, whatever's down there will keep getting stronger. It'll destroy everything, our homes, our families, maybe even more." Her words struck a chord. Everyone nodded, their expressions shifting from fear to grim determination. They had seen firsthand what the entity could do. The cracks in walls, the trembling earth, the shadowy figures that chased them through the tunnels. None of them wanted to face that again. But they also understood the risks. Performing the counter-ritual meant stepping back into the heart of the danger, confronting the very thing they'd been running from. With no time to waste, they prepared for the journey. This time, they brought extra supplies, candles, matches, salt, which the scroll suggested might help ward off negative energy, and a small vial of holy water someone had borrowed from a local church. Each item felt like a lifeline, something tangible to cling to in the face of the unknown. As they made their way to the shed, the air grew colder, heavier, as if the land itself knew they were coming. Descending into the tunnels once more felt like stepping into another world. The oppressive darkness closed in around them, broken only by the flickering beams of their flashlights. Every step echoed eerily, and the carvings on the walls seemed to watch them, their twisted shapes almost alive in the shifting light. No one dared speak, afraid that even the smallest sound might awaken something they couldn't handle. When they reached the main chamber, the atmosphere changed. The air was thick, hard to breathe, and the temperature dropped sharply. Frost began, forming on the stone altar, spreading outward in delicate patterns. In the center of the room, the ornate box still rested untouched, its presence both comforting and terrifying. She approached it slowly, setting the scroll beside it, and carefully unrolling it. The others formed a protective circle around her, holding lit candles and sprinkling salt along the edges of the chamber as instructed. The ritual was complex, requiring precise steps and recitations. According to the scroll, certain phrases needed to be spoken aloud in a specific order, each word unlocking a layer of the curse. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before beginning. Her voice trembled at first, but as she continued, it grew stronger, filling the chamber with an eerie resonance. The others joined in when prompted, repeating lines written in bold ink on the scroll. Their voices mingled together, creating a haunting melody that seemed to reverberate through the very stones. As the ritual progressed, the ground beneath them began to shake violently. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the shadows around them writhed unnaturally, twisting into grotesque shapes. From the corners of the chamber, low growls echoed, growing louder and angrier. The entity wasn't just watching, it was fighting back. One of the homeowners gasped as a shadowy figure lunged toward him, its formless body stretching unnaturally. He stumbled backward, dropping his candle, which sputtered out. Panic rippled through the group, but she shouted above the chaos, "Stay focused. We can't stop now." Her voice cut through the fear like a knife, grounding them in the moment. Summoning every ounce of courage, they pressed on. She reached the final line of the ritual, her voice ringing out clear and firm despite the trembling in her legs. As she finished speaking, the chamber erupted in a blinding flash of light. For a split second, everything went silent. The shaking stopped. The growls ceased and the shadows dissolved into nothingness. Then slowly the temperature began to rise, and the oppressive weight lifted. But the relief was short-lived. A low hum filled the air, growing louder until it became a deafening roar. The ground cracked open beneath the altar, revealing a swirling void of darkness. It pulsed with energy, as if alive, and tendrils of black smoke began creeping outward, reaching for them. The entity wasn't gone. It was trying to break free. She stared at the void, her mind racing. The ritual had weakened the curse, but not enough to fully contain the entity. If they didn't act quickly, it would escape, unleashing devastation far beyond Willow Creek Estates. Desperation surged through her as she scanned the room, searching for anything that might help. Her eyes landed on the vial of holy water. Without hesitation, she grabbed it and stepped closer to the void. The others shouted for her to stop, their voices tinged with panic, but she ignored them. Holding the vial high, she poured its contents into the crack, chanting the final phrase from the scroll. The reaction was instantaneous. The void recoiled, shrinking back as steam hissed from the fissure. The tendrils of smoke dissipated, and the chamber fell silent once more. For a moment, no one moved. They stood frozen, staring at the now still altar, unsure if it was truly over. Then one by one they lowered their candles, their faces reflecting a mix of relief and disbelief. They had done it, or at least, they thought they had. As they climbed back to the surface, the sun greeted them warmly, its golden rays cutting through the lingering chill in the air. It felt surreal to emerge into such brightness after the darkness they just faced. They collapsed onto the grass, laughing nervously, tears streaming down some of their faces. They had survived. Against all odds, they had survived, but she knew better than to let her guard down completely. The entity was contained, for now, but the land would always remember. Her ancestors' legacy wasn't just about curses or sacrifices. It was about balance, about respecting the natural order. And while the immediate threat had been neutralized, the responsibility to protect the land remained hers to carry. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the feeling that the land was still watching, not with malice this time, but with something akin to gratitude. She had honored her family's wishes while finding a way to coexist with the modern world. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Whatever secrets the soil held, they would stay buried. For now. The days that followed the ritual were a blur of exhaustion and reflection. The group had survived something unimaginable, but the experience left them changed in ways they couldn't fully articulate. Life at Willow Creek Estate slowly began to return to normal, or as close to normal as it could get after everything they'd been through. The strange occurrences stopped entirely. No more flickering lights, no more mysterious noises, and no more cracks appearing in walls. It was as if the land itself had exhaled, releasing the tension that had gripped it for so long. But even though the immediate danger had passed, the weight of what they'd uncovered lingered. Conversations around dinner tables or during casual encounters often drifted back to the tunnels, the carvings, and the shadowy figures that had chased them. Some residents joked about turning their ordeal into a book or a movie, while others avoided talking about it altogether, as if saying too much might awaken something they'd rather forget. Everyone coped in their own way, but one thing was clear. None of them would ever look at the ground beneath their feet the same way again. She found herself spending more time on the property than she ever had before. After the ritual, she decided to move out of her small apartment in the city and into a modest cottage near the edge of the land. It wasn't flashy or modern like the homes in Willow Creek Estates. It was old, with creaky floors and drafty windows. But it felt right somehow. Being closer to the land gave her a sense of purpose, a connection to her family's history that she hadn't realized she needed. Every morning she walked along the boundaries of the property, checking for any signs of trouble. She carried her grandfather's journal with her everywhere, flipping through its pages whenever inspiration struck. Over time, she began piecing together fragments of his notes, trying to understand not just the curse, but the philosophy behind it. Her ancestors hadn't cursed the land out of hatred or spite. They had done it out of love, out of a desire to protect something precious. They believed the land was alive, not in a literal sense, but in a spiritual one. It wasn't just dirt and rocks. It was a living, breathing entity that deserved respect. This realization changed how she approached her role as caretaker. Instead of seeing herself as someone burdened by responsibility, she started viewing it as an honor. She planted trees where the soil looked barren, cleared debris from forgotten corners of the property, and even organized community cleanup days to involve the residents of Willow Creek Estates. At first, people were hesitant to participate, still wary of the land's secrets, but over time they warmed up to the idea. Working together created a sense of unity, a shared bond that helped heal some of the fear and mistrust that had built up over the past few months. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, she sat on the porch of her cottage with a cup of tea in hand. A young couple who lived nearby joined her, bringing chairs and a plate of homemade cookies. They chatted casually about everyday things, the weather, their kids, plans for the weekend. But eventually, the conversation turned to the land. "Never thought I'd say this," the woman said, brushing crumbs from her lap. "But I feel safer here now, like we're part of something bigger." Her husband nodded in agreement. "Yeah, it's weird. Before all this happened, I didn't really think about the land at all. Now I can't help but notice little things. The way the wind moves through the trees, the sound of birds in the morning. It's like the place has a heartbeat." She smiled, feeling a swell of pride mixed with relief. These weren't just words spoken out of politeness. They were genuine observations, reflections of a shift in perspective. By confronting the darkness beneath the surface, they had also uncovered a deeper appreciation for the beauty above it. Still, she knew better than to let her guard down completely. While the entity was contained, the barrier holding it back wasn't indestructible. The modifications she'd made to the curse ensured that future disturbances wouldn't trigger the same level of chaos, but the risk remained. The land would always demand respect, and anyone who tried to exploit it without understanding its history would face consequences. To ensure that knowledge wasn't lost, she began documenting everything: her grandfather's journals, the map, the scroll, and her own experiences. She compiled these materials into a single volume, which she stored safely in a fireproof box. Copies were distributed to trusted members of the community, ensuring that the story would be passed down to future generations. She also worked with local historians to preserve the artifacts they'd recovered from the tunnels, donating them to a museum with strict instructions on how they should be handled. As the months went by, life at Willow Creek Estates settled into a rhythm. Families came and went, children played in yards, and seasons changed in predictable cycles. But beneath the surface, the land remained vigilant, its ancient heart beating steadily, silently watching over those who called it home. For her part, she embraced her role as guardian, finding peace in the quiet moments spent tending to the land. She often visited the shed where the trapdoor led to the tunnels, leaving offerings of flowers or herbs as a gesture of gratitude. Sometimes, when the wind rustled through the trees just right, she swore she could hear whispers, not menacing, ones but soft murmurs almost like reassurance. In the end, the story of Willow Creek Estates became one of resilience and renewal. What had started as a nightmare transformed into an opportunity, a chance to reconnect with the past, honor traditions, and build a future rooted in harmony. The land was no longer a prison for dark secrets. It was a sanctuary, a reminder that even the deepest scars could heal with care and understanding. And so, life moved forward, shaped by lessons learned and bonds forged in the face of adversity. The people of Willow Creek Estates may have stumbled upon something extraordinary, but they emerged stronger for it. As for her, she finally understood why her grandfather had fought so hard to protect the land. It wasn't just about ownership or legacy, it was about belonging to the land, to each other, and to the stories that tied them all together.